This is the Mekong, the biggest river on the Indochina Peninsula. It starts in the Tibetan Plateau, stretches over 2,500 miles, and flows through countries like Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and China. And we're particularly interested in the Chinese part of the river. What's so special about it? For example, China has built a lot of dams and hydroelectric plants on this river, and you can see them all on this map. Two of them, Xiawan and Nuazadu, are the largest of all the structures on the river and can hold much more water in their reservoirs than all the others. This cascade of dams and the hydroelectric plants connected to them play a huge role for the country and its people, but a large number of dams don't always mean something good. As the number of hydropower plants on the Mekong River increased, scientists became more and more concerned. And now they're really raising alarms. The numerous Chinese dams, especially the Xiawan Dam, are literally making people's lives worse. How does this work, and what could it lead to? Let's find out. Let's start by taking a look at the Xiawan Dam. It has an arch design and is located in the Yunnan province, right here. The dam was built from 2002 to 2010, cost $3.9 billion, and turned out to be truly massive. Its height is 960 feet. By this measure, it ranks in the top 5 highest dams in the world. So I guess we can assume it holds an enormous amount of water. You bet. The Xiawan Reservoir can store 4 trillion gallons of water to support the comfortable life of Yunnan province, along with other dams in the upper Mekong. The stated capacity of the hydroelectric power station is 4,200 megawatts, which allows the dam to generate about 19 terawatt hours of energy every year. To give you an idea of how useful this power station is for the country, it helps save about 6.9 million tons of coal annually and prevents 13.5 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. As for the location of the dam, Yunnan province is the southwesternmost part of China. The main industry there is agriculture, and this sector plays a leading role in the province's economy. The climate plays a big role in this. Yunnan's one of the warmest regions in China. The average daytime temperature here is 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and this allows people to successfully grow tea, coffee, sugarcane, tobacco, and rice, with the latter being harvested 3 times a year. Also up north, corn is grown. In general, there is a lot of everything. As of 2020, the area planted with grains was 10 million acres. The grain production volume was 18.96 million tons, and the average yield was over 10,000 pounds per 2.5 acres. And all of this can partly be credited to the numerous dams, including Xiawan, the biggest structure on the Mekong River. Why should the dam be thanked? Well, the answer is pretty simple. A huge amount of water is held back by the dam in a sort of reservoir from which water can be taken for irrigating crops. Yes, the water level in dams changes during a release, but it still stays at an acceptable level to ensure a good harvest. But this seems to apply only to the side where the reservoir is, because everyone downstream has to pay the price. In this case, a dam was installed on the river that's one of the largest in the world, so the consequences are pretty serious, even affecting the weather and climate. Back in 2010, after the Xiawan Dam was put into operation, there were news reports saying it was lowering the water level in the Mekong River. At that time, a terrible drought hit 4 countries: Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. Around 65 million people for whom the Mekong is a source of life and food were at risk. In 2016, Cambodia faced a water shortage in 18 out of 25 provinces, and tens of thousands of poor rural households were hit hard. According to the data from the European Commission's Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection Department, in Thailand, due to the extreme heat, 21 people died. And in Vietnam, about 2 million people were struggling with a lack of drinking water. Also, the low water levels in the river allowed salt water to invade the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, destroying 10% of the country's rice fields. And all the affected countries collectively blamed China. What did the country say in response to the accusations? According to Chinese officials, the dam can't have such a big impact on everyone downstream. They claim that the drought affecting the entire river basin is due to extremely dry weather, and the drop in water levels in the Mekong River has nothing to do with it. The debates have quieted down, but the question remains, was there any truth in China's words? To get a better understanding, let's jump to more modern times. After all, there are more opportunities to monitor the river's condition now. In 2019 to 2021, a significant lack of rainfall became the main cause of drought and low river flow in the countries downstream of the Mekong. However, this was made worse by dams holding back huge amounts of water, which made already dry regions even drier. While countries downstream were suffering, China's Xiaowan and Huazadu dams held more than 50% of the active water reserve of the Mekong. In 2020, the driest year on record, these dams could have been used to ease the drought. During the rainy season, by increasing the flow downstream, the dams could have released some of the water to help those affected by the drought, but that didn't happen. China kept holding back the water and used it for its own purposes. What's next is even bigger. In 2019, the Stimson Center in Washington published materials stating that it was the Chinese dams that caused the drought affecting 4 countries. The reports are based on satellite images used to monitor climate changes. They were provided by the company Eyes on Earth. So what did they find after studying them? A pretty concerning thing. The images clearly show the progress of droughts in recent years, which have caused chaos along the lower Mekong basin. This infrared image from 2015 shows how bad things are in the lower reaches of the river. While everything's great in China, the countries downstream are having trouble. Here's a shot from 2017. Back then, monsoons were dominating the border between Thailand and Laos. And here's a shot from 2019. Everything around the river dried up and the flow itself dropped significantly. This happened because the critically important monsoon rains didn't arrive. Due to the drought in the region, the water level in the Mekong River dropped to its lowest in 100 years. And on top of that, there are the Chinese dams. In the affected countries, there have been several failed harvests, and concerns about the Mekong were so strong that local authorities called for a state of emergency. Besides many crops failing, fish stocks have also decreased, and that's pretty serious because fish is the main source of protein for the population of many Asian countries. So what's the bottom line? First, China's dams actually had an impact on the climate. In 2019, while a drought devastated the lower Mekong basin, China experienced more rainfall and snowmelt than usual, and almost all the runoff from those events went into China's reservoirs. Second, because China wasn't releasing the water, people lost their crops and fish. What was China doing at that time? Its dams were holding trillions of gallons of water, seriously disrupting the flow downstream. It turns out that China has claimed the river for itself? Looks like it. And this isn't just our personal opinion, but rather well-known facts. The thing is, China's never joined the conventions that would threaten its right to maintain absolute control over the Mekong on its territory. Over the last 30 years, China's actions regarding the Mekong have shown that the country will never share the water resource. In other words, countries downstream will have to suffer. Of course, China knows that other countries see this policy as selfish, and it strongly insists that it's not its fault. The latest report from Chinese researchers denies any connection between the dams and the decreased flow of the Mekong. In support of China, the Global Times even published the results of a study claiming that the dams China built on the Mekong play a crucial role during the rainy season. No downsides. Even more surprising was the reaction of the Mekong River Commission, which is supposed to care about the state of the river and everyone it supports. The commission questioned the credibility of the data published by Eyes on Earth, the same images we showed earlier. According to the commission, additional research needs to be done before drawing any conclusions. And honestly, that seems really odd. Why? Well, at least because other countries are also conducting research on the relationship between the dams and droughts, and the results there, let's say, aren't very encouraging. For example, the University of Colorado in Boulder published data from 30 years of research related to precipitation around 92 major dams in North America. The conclusion is clear. Big dams have a significant impact on the climate. Looks like everything adds up. But we've been focusing too much on what happens when China holds back the water. Let's look at the opposite situation, when hydroelectric power plants are used to their full capacity. What happens if China starts releasing water actively? First, it's worth mentioning that this actually happens. Sometimes the water flow in the Mekong sharply increases even during droughts. Dams with huge reservoirs store a lot of water during the rainy season and simply release it when there's a demand for electricity. According to a study that included an analysis of hydrological data from the Mekong River over nearly 100 years, it was found that in the last 15 years or even longer, the water level on the border between Laos and Cambodia sometimes rose by 3 to 5 feet. Yes, this happened during droughts. It's unlikely that climate change could have had such a sharp effect on the river, but water discharge definitely could. As a result, different types of trees adapted to seasonal flooding and growing in the riverbed were dying in large numbers. It may seem like water is all good for trees, but that's not the case. Yes, these trees and shrubs are adapted to be underwater for several months a year. However, in the middle of the dry season, the water level usually drops significantly, exposing the tree roots and allowing them to survive. Moreover, the low water level gives new saplings a chance to take root, for example by wrapping their roots around rocks. In short, when there's too much water and it stays at that level for too long, it disrupts the tree's life cycle and they simply die. We think there's no need to go into detail about how excessive and untimely flooding of forests has large-scale ecological and social consequences. Let's just put it clearly. It negatively affects a huge number of fish, birds, and other aquatic animals that rely on forests for food and habitat. China surely knows this, but for some reason, it ignores it. But let's get back to the fact that the Mekong River actually flows through several countries. It's not just Chinese dams, and it's not only China making things worse. Take Laos, for example. Even though it's the poorest country among all those bordering the Mekong, it's literally turning itself into the energy battery of Southeast Asia. How? Laos is building lots of hydropower plants. By 2016, the country had over 60 operational dams on the Mekong's tributaries, plus several more were being prepared for launch. 2 of them were to be located on the main riverbed. Let's focus on the larger dam called Shayaburi, which has been the subject of legal disputes for a long time. Authorities were concerned that the dam would disrupt fish migration and affect communities downstream. According to the dam's developer, the Thai company CK Power, they spent more than $600 million on mitigating negative impacts, including installing fish ladders and special gates to allow sediment to pass through. It all sounds good, but environmentalists weren't convinced, and honestly, there was a reason for that. Soon after the dam started operating, the Mekong River, which is usually brown, turned bright blue in some places in the south. This was a sign that the river had lost the brown sediment it usually carries, which helps enrich the soil in the basin. This phenomenon is called hungry water, and it can be very destructive as it washes away the riverbanks and causes erosion. If we sum up everything we've discussed, the situation turns out to be very ambiguous. In the 2010s, the Mekong River Basin saw an unprecedented boom in hydropower plant construction, and China played a major role in financing this construction boom. Additionally, money also came from other countries, and all of it was justified by the idea that hydropower plants are good for the environment. On the one hand, it's really true. Hydroelectric plants don't emit greenhouse gases that negatively impact everything. Well, you know how fast the climate's changing on the planet, so hydroelectric plants seem like a good solution. On the other hand, some experts call hydroelectric plants fake green energy generators, and you can understand them. Just think about all the suffering of people downstream. What should we do with all this? Build fewer hydroelectric plants, especially when it comes to the Mekong. Some people realize the scope of the problem. For example, the Cambodian government is rethinking its plans for new dams. Some people only care about energy. Laos is working on a lot of dams and doesn't plan to stop. Until all the countries come to a consensus, the situation won't change. By the way, how are things with dams and rivers around the world? We've covered Asia, but now let's take a quick trip to Africa. Spoiler, things are even worse than with the Mekong River. This time, Ethiopia plays the role of the dam builder, and the Blue Nile takes on the part of the Mekong River. Egypt's involved too, and the whole situation's pretty complicated, but we'll try to explain it clearly. In recent years, the international community has been closely following the conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt. The reason was Ethiopia's construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam on one of the Nile's tributaries, the very Blue Nile. So what's the problem here? Egypt heavily relies on the main river and saw such actions as a threat to its water resources. So you get it, right? This country doesn't want to share. The situation's almost like with China and the Mekong, only this time it was Ethiopia that built the dam. Ethiopia is aiming for its new hydroelectric plant to provide electricity to over half of the country's population who currently have no access to it. Plus, the massive project has the potential not only to meet domestic needs, but also to supply power to neighboring countries like Sudan, South Sudan, Kenya, Djibouti, and Eritrea. Sounds like a good plan for the neighbors, but Egypt is definitely not happy about it. The Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has stated that Ethiopia is ignoring the interests of the downstream countries of the Nile and putting their water security at risk. In Egypt, there are concerns that even a small reduction in the Nile's flow by 2% could lead to significant losses in agriculture, particularly the disappearance of 200,000 acres of irrigated land. Moreover, the Nile provides food and electricity for the overwhelming majority of Egyptians living in the river's delta and valley. In short, if Ethiopia starts actively filling its reservoir during a drought to boost power production, this could severely cut the water supply to Egypt. Why did these disputes even come up? The Nile, after all, isn't a small river, it flows through 10 countries. The thing is, even though the river is crucial for all the countries it passes through, only Egypt and Sudan have secured rights to use the Nile's water resources. That's just how it happened historically. Egypt was allocated the most water from the Nile, 66%, while Sudan got 22%. But there's still 12% left. Why not give it to Ethiopia? Actually, there's nothing left to give. All that water just evaporates, and Ethiopia doesn't get a single drop. Besides, they never signed the agreement on water distribution. The country had no choice but to build a dam and save itself. Anyway, the war for water resources will never end as long as new hydroelectric plants are being built on rivers.